Going through Akala again was probably the most disappointing time I had with this game. Which is weird because looking back there are actually quite a few things changed and added to the second island. For example, the hotel in High City now has a floor added with 4 hotel rooms, one of which is Chorus's. He doesn't say anything too interesting though, but he will have more of a presence later in this game compared to the originals. It would have been great to be able to work in the hotels though, just like in X and Y, but whatever. These new hotel rooms are, by the way, one of the only real additions to the towns of Alola, which makes me really sad because I would have loved to enter more homes in Paniola Town or see some apartments in Hau'oli or Mali City. Before leaving High City, we meet Dexio and Sina, the 2 assistants of Professor Sycamore from Pokémon X and Y. In Sun and Moon they gave us the Zygarde Cube, which now no longer exists. Instead of 100 Zygarde cells, we now get to collect 100 totem stickers, which are thankfully much easier to spot and no longer restricted to time of day. Although this means that you can no longer use the 10 or 50% forms of Zygarde in your playthrough, I'm fine with this change, because if you collect enough stickers, you can go to Samson Oak and trade them for totem Pokémon, which aren't really that special except that they're much bigger than the regular versions of their species. I really like this idea, and I like that there's nothing too special about these Pokémon. But I'm not quite sure what to think of the version exclusives here. You get 6 totem Pokémon in every version, but except for Mimikyu, they're all different. It makes sense for eradicating Gumshoes, since they're actually only met in one of the 2 versions, but the rest feels a bit random. What's great though is that you can get a giant Salazzle and Vikavolt, which aren't even totem fights in the Ultra versions anymore, and apparently you can trade all the old totem Pokémon over to Sun and Moon, which is something I would love to be able to do with all the other new forms and Pokémon added here, but sadly Sun and Moon will never be fully compatible to the Ultra versions. Game Freak on a Game Freak. On our way to Lana's trial at Brooklet Hill, we fight our first double battles, and for some reason I think they run just a little bit better on the old 3DS, which is the only one I have so I can't check, but I could definitely be wrong about that. It's definitely sad that the double battles are my favorite battle format, but I just can't enjoy them as much with such a horrible frame rate and long wait times when my 3DS calculates the opponent's move. So I can't wait for the games on the Switch, where Horde, Triple and Rotation battles will hopefully come back and run without any problems. The water trial doesn't really feel that different, although quite a few things were changed. For example, it now starts much sooner into Brooklet Hill, which makes perfect sense to me, but keeps you from catching some of the wild Pokemon in the area, which is quite sad. Once again you drive off some Wishy-Washy, but now have some Dewpider to deal with as well, hinting at the change in totem Pokemon at the end of the trial, which is now a Requinid. I'm not sure if it, or Wishy-Washy's giant school form look more threatening, but I personally had problems with both battles. I mean, a Requinid doesn't just benefit from the rain, has an Ice-type move, an incredibly useful ally Pokemon, it also has a Leech Life and a stupid Wackenberry weakening your first Electric-type move. Anyway, after you finish this trial, you'll get the fishing rod from Lana, and although there are no changes as to how it works compared to Sun and Moon, I think they changed the way bubbling spots are handled. In Sun and Moon it felt like some fishing spots were always bubbling, while others weren't. Here it looks to be much more random. I'm just happy that the exploit of saving and reloading in front of the bubbles still works, because some of the encounter rates are still garbage. After scaring away some stupid Sudowoodo with our Mortirium Z, we once again meet the Ultra Recon squad, and instead of using a boring Furfrou, they now battle with Poipole, which might just be the cutest Ultra Beast yet. Sorry, Calistela. What's even better is that you can get this little cutie quite a while before the Elite Four, which made me throw the ranches out of my team. I was especially excited about that because I didn't spoil myself on what its evolution looked like, even though I knew how to get it. Poipole, which is a wonderful and smart little thing, evolves into a horrifying nightmare of a dragon once it learns the move Dragon Pulse, which for some reason isn't in its level up moveset. It would have been much better if at level 55 or something, it just naturally learns it so that everyone would get the evolution without having to resort to using the internet. Maybe they really wanted us to wait just before the Elite Four to evolve it, but there would have been much better ways to do that. But maybe I'm just so confused by this decision because I freaking love Naganadel. It always quenches my disappointment of no new Alolan forms, because with Poipole and the new Lycanroc form, you can at least use 2 new Pokemon for more than enough time during the main game. And I would argue that there is enough post-game content to satisfyingly use the other Ultra Beast and Necrozma forms as well, so that is nice. Anyway, our next stop is the Battle Royale, which didn't really change, although I should mention that the easiest rank now starts at level 30, making it much simpler to jump into battling shortly after getting here. If you don't remember, in Sun and Moon the easiest rank had your opponents use level 50 Pokemon, sometimes even with Mega Stones equipped, and didn't even scale your team to that level to at least give you a small chance, since at that point they're still only in their mid-20s, so this change is definitely appreciated. Kiowa's trial at the top of Wailer Volcano was one of my favorites in Sun and Moon, so I'm not quite sure why they changed some parts of it. I feel it worked much better in the original games, which doesn't mean that it sucks now. Its jokes just don't work as well if you haven't played Sun and Moon before. The changed totem Pokemon, however, is definitely an improvement, since the Lazul felt kind of out of place, which may be a good thing to some people, but I like the giant dancing Marowak better, and it actually calls the Lazul for help, which is a really strong ally in this fight. Ultra Sun players can get the totem Marowak after collecting 40 stickers, and since you get it at level 25, it can actually learn its unique move Shadow Bone, which for some reason no legit Marowak can until the move Reminder, so if you've never used this Pokemon and have Ultra Sun, I can only recommend you get it, because Marowak is awesome. Be sure to also get a Thick Club as well. In general, I feel that the trials and basically everything in these games is a bit more difficult than in Sun and Moon, which in my opinion was one of the hardest designed Pokemon games concerning the design of important battles. But given the flexible nature of the Pokemon a player uses during the game, difficulty in Pokemon games is always very hard to judge, and it's probably a mess to balance these games for everyone from younger beginner to old veteran of the franchise. Before we can continue to the next trial, we meet Mon, the father of Lily and Gladion, who after an accident has lost his memory and is now operating the Pokepelago, which he tells us about. I like this new encounter, because in Sun and Moon the Pelago is just suddenly there in the menu, and if you're unlucky it is hidden on the second page, so you won't notice it until way later in the game. Given that it's such a useful and cool feature, I'm happy that fewer people will miss it. Next up is an interesting surprise, because after opening up the blockade in front of the tunnel, I expected you just skip it with a small loading screen and simply exit on the other side. But for some reason someone at Game Freak thought that it would be great to have the tunnel now be its own location where you can catch Kecleon and meet the Ultra Recon Squad again, and I have to say I really like that person. This small unexpected addition makes this island feel much more whole than I would have thought. Thank you, random developers. I was really excited about the trial in Lost Jungle, because in Sun and Moon it felt really cheap to just go everywhere in the jungle and collect some random items before you pounded Mallow and fought Totem Lurantis. So I was pleasantly surprised that this trial was quite different, felt much more wholesome and interesting, and also made the jungle feel much more alive. Although I have to wonder if Game Freak removed the cooking scene because they thought it wouldn't fit anymore, or because of all the memes online. I'm okay with them not replacing Totem Lurantis with something else though, because in Sun and Moon it was probably the one fight most people had problems with, although I never had any for some reason. This time it gets some new ally Pokemon, which make this battle even more difficult, so be ready to fight hard. Looking back at it, there are quite a lot of changes and additions to this island, but for some reason it still feels lacking compared to Melemele's overhaul. And since that's everything I have to say about Alola Island, let's continue to Ula'ula. After a not really different visit to the Aether Paradise, where we learn that the Ultra Recon Squad is working with the Aether Foundation, we reach the third island, home to the Electric and Ghost type trials. Luckily we don't fight Hao right after getting off the boat, giving us time to prepare for his killer Raichu, which this time doesn't even lead his team, although that doesn't make this fight any easier. By now it's pretty obvious that Hao's team is much bigger and more interesting compared to Sun and Moon. Before he only had 3 Pokemon at this point, now he has 5, which makes for a much harder battle that you don't even have to win. There were a couple of story battles in Sun and Moon that, even if you lose, the story will continue, which reminds me of Pokemon Yellow and your encounters with your rival there. If you lost too much against him, his Eevee evolves into Vaporeon, theoretically making it easier for your Pikachu to beat him. If you win all the time, he'll instead get Jolteon. Of course this isn't the case for Hao, but I like that your friendly battles are really that, just battles between friends for fun. Anyway, after a short trip through Mali Garden, we can finally explore Mali City and find the newly built Cantonian Gym. Now, when footage was first shown from this room that looked a lot like Lieutenant Surge's gym in Vermilion City, speculations ran rampant. Will we go back to Kanto? Will the Island Challenge be replaced with a regular gym system? As with nearly everything in this game, there is a lot of potential here, but everything just turns out to be less than expected. This Cantonian gym is just a fan recreation of the Vermilion City gym. There is no puzzle, there is no real gym leader battle, and there is nothing interesting happening in post-game with this gym either. But I'm okay with that. I loved how they incorporated the weird writing style from the Game Boy era, with every important word written in all caps, and I love hearing the remixed music, but I obviously can't ignore the fact that with a little bit more development time this could have been an amazing addition to these games. Think about it, what if this worked like the Trick House in Hoenn? Every day you could come back here and face another one of the 8 original gyms, with trainers and a wannabe gym leader. Most of the puzzles should even be realizable with the added stuff for the Rainbow Rocket episode. Just having the teams of the trainers in the gym change between the 18 types every day would have been really cool, but the way it is now, the Cantonian gym just feels like a massive waste of potential. There could have been something great with just a little bit more time spent on it. At least give me the Thunder Badge as an accessory for trainer customization. One thing the developers did spend some time on was Sophocles' trial at the Hokulani Observatory. In Sun and Moon this was the most disappointing trial for me, because it was just so obvious of how rushed development for these trials was. You literally stare at a black screen and wait for sounds to play you should identify. This would have been acceptable on the Game Boy, but not anymore. I mean, how would deaf people or those who for some other reason couldn't play with the sound on finish this puzzle without just randomly guessing? It's just fantastic that Game Freak was obviously also unhappy with this trial, which is why they've completely changed it. Instead of guessing sounds, you now have to solve a very cute little puzzle which could just as well be featured in a Professor Layton game. And although the final puzzle, where the solution is just as simple as that, is obvious in hindsight, it took me some time to solve that, and in some way I actually like the fact that the game doesn't interfere and write out the solution for you after 5 seconds of struggling, which they totally could have done. It's also great that you can go back into that room later on and do 4 additional puzzles in the same style, the last one actually being quite hard to solve, at least for me. Togedemaru as a totem Pokémon works quite well too, and can get on your nerves with Spiky Shield or Scaramony as its ally, but I can't fault it for that because it's just too cute to hate. After getting Electrium Z, Sophocles opens up the battle agency in Festival Plaza, so let's talk about the plaza for a second. Not much has changed from Sun and Moon, which was to be expected. You are still disconnected from the internet when leaving the plaza, and there is of course no alternative to it, so people who were hoping for improvements regarding online play will be disappointed. There are some slight changes, like Wonder Trade no longer throwing you out of the menu, forcing you to reconnect, or that you can see the specific number of points you have to get for 5-star results during the missions, which are of course appreciated, but people who hated the Festival Plaza will definitely not love it now. What you may love, however, is the new battle agency, which kinda works like the battle factory from Emerald, where you can't fight with your own Pokémon, but with one of 3 pre-made Pokémon you borrow for a couple of fights. What's new here is that this now revolves around its online functionality, so the other 2 borrowed Pokémon in your team will have to be contributed by 2 random players, and if they've been fighting a lot in the battle agency, their Pokémon will be higher level and therefore a bigger help. I love this new facility, and although it's worse than the Battle Factory in some ways, and some other problems like not enough people being high rank enough to help you out on the harder difficulties, it's a really fun addition and a great way to farm festival coins. I also love the fact that you can use this feature comparatively early in the game, although it's nothing compared to the battle tents in Emerald of course. Back in the real world, we're continuing with our travels to the next trial and visit Blush Mountain near the power plant. It's sad we still can't get any closer to it, but Game Freak at least made Blush Mountain the place where Charjabug, Magneton and Nosepass evolve, instead of Pony Canyon very late in the game. This makes a lot of sense, since as much as I love Charjabug, Vikavolt is just much more useful. What they should have changed as well is Alola and Geodude. In Sun and Moon you could only get them quite late in the game, which is weird since Geodude has always been a very early Pokemon in the other games, but in Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon you can't catch Geodude at all, only Graveler. Why not make Geodude catchable in Diglett's tunnel like Larvitar? Also, why did they remove the in-game trader who wanted a Graveler in exchange for a Graveler? It was a wonderful thing to be able to use a Golem without having to trade with some random person on the internet, and a great way to introduce trade evolutions. Sure, now you can trade a Phantom for a Phantom, but I prefer the original trade. Moving forward, we reach the motel on Route 13. People may remember this motel because you could find a lone Stuffle in there. Employees told you that Stuffle's trainer has disappeared and probably left it behind, which is worrisome enough, but in post-game it's just gone, which kind of implies that it's dead. Well, in Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon, you can actually find its trainer who got lost in the desert. If you help him out with some water, he returns to the motel, and he and Stuffle live happily ever after. After Route 13, we reach Tapu Village, which is still weirdly uninteresting. At least now we can actually enter a small area of Mount Lanakila, which means we can evolve Crabrawler much sooner, which is appreciated. Glaceon is still unavailable until right before you challenge the Elite Four though, which sucks. Ace Roller's Ghost Trial wasn't changed too much, which makes a lot of sense since most people, including me, thought it was already the strongest trial of the game. Same goes for Mimikyu as the totem Pokémon, which now not just has Leech Life for recovery, but also new allies to help it torment unprepared players. After beating the trial, if we return to the abandoned Mega Mart at night, we can follow a Mimikyu to the back room, where, if we show we love it more than Pikachu, we get the new Zap move for Mimikyu called Let's Snuggle Forever, which is absolutely horrifying but also really useful if you have a Mimikyu on your team. Everything else on this island up to and including Po Town is pretty much the same, so let's skip right to our assault on the Aether Paradise, where the story starts to kick off and change in a small but meaningful way. In Pokémon Sun and Moon, Lusamine was a really cool villain. Not only was she the first woman to be the main antagonist of the Pokémon games, but she was also incredibly evil, even being okay with Nebby dying just so she could fulfill her goal of loving Nihilego, with which she even fused after probably being subjected to his neurotoxin and becoming even more mad than she already was. I kind of hoped that in Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon they would finally realize that it would be the coolest thing if we could actually fight her in a fused state, but instead of doing that, the developers changed Lusamine's entire character arc, and with that the whole climax of the game. Instead of going after Nihilego like in Sun and Moon, Lusamine now wants to defeat Necrozma and save Alola and all living beings from its darkness, which is a good cause of course, although Lusamine still wants to use Nebby for her plans and doesn't care if it dies. So instead of an evil villain, she is now a well-intentioned arsehole and even gets a redemption later on, which in a way is nice because it means she does not end up comatose and spews hateful nonsense at Lily, but in my opinion it makes for a much weaker and less interesting story and character, which is kind of sad. Anyway, after her and Guzma disappear into Necrozma's world, Lily changes outfit and demeanor, and we make off for Pony Island, where we will try to summon Solgaleo or Lunala to deal with Necrozma and all its mess.